The afternoon crowd at Buckingham Palace was unusually thick for a Tuesday in late November. Hundreds of tourists pressed against the iron railings, cameras clicking constantly as they tried to capture the perfect shot of the famous red-coated guards. Lance Corporal Michael Chen stood at his post near the main gate, his expression stoic, despite the constant flash of photography and the occasional attempt by visitors to make him smile or move. Chen had been serving as a royal guard for 3 years, following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who had served during the 1960s. The 20-5-year-old took immense pride in his role, understanding that he represented not just military tradition, but the stability and continuity of British institutions. His family had immigrated from Hong Kong when he was a child, and wearing the iconic uniform represented the fulfillment of his deepest sense of belonging and service. Among the crowd, a man in his 30s named Derek Walsh stood apart from the cheerful tourists. His clothes were disheveled. His eyes darted nervously between the guards and the gathering crowd, and his hands shook slightly as he clutched a brown paper bag. Walsh had been struggling with unemployment for 8 months after losing his factory job, and his frustration with the system had been building for weeks. Walsh felt that the royal family and their guards represented everything wrong with British society. While he struggled to pay rent and buy food, millions of pounds were spent maintaining palaces and paying for ceremonial soldiers who, in his view, served no real purpose. His anger had been festering through sleepless nights and rejection letters from potential employers. The crowd pressed closer as someone spotted movement from within the palace grounds, hoping to catch a glimpse of a royal family member. In the pushing and excitement, Walsh found himself squeezed right against the railings, directly in front of Chen's position. The proximity to the guard, who symbolized everything he resented, pushed his simmering rage closer to a dangerous boiling point. Chen noticed the agitated man but maintained his professional composure. Having dealt with upset individuals before, during his service, however, something about Walsh's body language and the way his eyes kept darting around suggested this situation might be different from the usual tourist complaints or protests that occasionally occurred at the palace gates. Walsh began muttering under his breath about inequality and wasted money while staring directly at Chen. His voice grew louder as his agitation increased, drawing concerned glances from nearby tourists who began to sense that something was wrong. "Standing there like a toy soldier while real people suffer," Walsh said, his words becoming more audible and aggressive. Chen remained motionless, but his training kicked in as he assessed the potential threat. The man's behavior was escalating beyond normal tourist frustration, and his position so close to the railings put him within striking distance if he chose to act on his obvious anger. Chen mentally prepared himself while maintaining his ceremonial stance. Suddenly, Walsh reached into his paper bag and pulled out a broken beer bottle, its jagged edges glinting dangerously in the afternoon light. The crowd immediately around him stepped back in alarm, some people screaming as they realized what was happening. Parents grabbed their children and moved away from the railings, while others fumbled for their phones to call for help. "You think you're so important," Walsh shouted, his voice now carrying across the courtyard. "Standing there in your fancy uniform while people like me can't even feed our families?" He thrust the broken bottle through the railings, the sharp glass coming within inches of Chen's neck. The guard could feel the cold air displaced by the weapon's movement. Chen's training took over completely, while every instinct screamed at him to step back or defend himself. His duty required him to maintain position and not escalate the situation. Moving could provoke Walsh into more dangerous action, and Chen was acutely aware that dozens of innocent tourists were still within range of an unpredictable man with a weapon. The crowd was now in full panic mode, with people screaming and running in different directions. Security cameras captured everything as the situation spiraled toward potential tragedy. Chen could hear the distant sound of police sirens approaching, but he knew that help was still several crucial minutes away. Jagged glass remained frighteningly close to his throat as Walsh continued his angry tirade. Chen began speaking in a calm, steady voice that cut through Walsh's shouting. Sir, I can see that you're in pain. I understand that life has been difficult for you. His words were carefully chosen, drawing on crisis management training that emphasized de-escalation over confrontation. The broken bottle remained dangerously close, but Chen's tone seemed to momentarily confuse Walsh. You understand? Walsh laughed bitterly, though his grip on the bottle seemed to loosen slightly. How could someone like you possibly understand what it's like to lose everything? You've got a steady job, respect, a uniform that makes people look up to you. You've got nothing but rejection letters and empty promises. Chen continued speaking in the same measured tone, even as sweat beaded on his forehead from the stress of the situation. You're right that I have a job I'm proud of. But I also know what it's like to feel invisible, to wonder if your life matters. My family came here with nothing but hope, and there were years when we weren't sure we belonged anywhere. Something in Chen's words seemed to reach Walsh on a deeper level. The broken bottle wavered in his hand as conflicting emotions played across his face. Anger warred with desperation, and underneath both was a profound sadness that seemed to drain some of the fire from his rage. The crowd had backed away to a safer distance, but many people continued watching the unfolding drama with held breath. I wanted to make something of myself, Walsh said, his voice breaking slightly. I worked for 15 years at that factory. Never missed a day. Always did my best. Then they closed it down and threw us all away like we were nothing. Now I can't even get a job stocking shelves because I'm too old, too experienced, too expensive. Chen felt genuine compassion for the man suffering, even as the weapon remained pointed at him. Sir, your life has value that goes far beyond any job or paycheck. This moment doesn't have to define who you are. You still have choices. And people who care about you wouldn't want you to throw your life away like this. Tears began streaming down Walsh's face as the full weight of his situation hit him.
Us.
The broken bottle in his hand seemed to represent all the broken pieces of his life, and the young guard's compassionate words had pierced through his anger to reach the desperate human being underneath. I don't know what I'm doing, he whispered. I just wanted someone to see that I exist, that I matter. Chen took a calculated risk and shifted slightly. Not to escape, but to face Walsh more directly. I see you, sir. You matter. Your pain is real, and your feelings are valid. But hurting me won't solve your problems, and it will only create new ones that you can't take back. His voice carried genuine warmth despite the dangerous circumstances. The approaching police sirens were getting louder, and Walsh could see officers moving into position around the palace perimeter. He realized that his moment of desperate action was about to end. One way or another. The broken bottle trembled in his hand as he struggled with the decision of whether to follow through with his threat or surrender peacefully. What happens? To me now? Walsh asked, his voice small and defeated. Chen's response was immediate and sincere. That depends on what you choose to do in the next few minutes. You can still walk away from this as someone who made a mistake, but didn't cross a line that can't be uncrossed. Other royal guards had arrived, but were maintaining distance, following Chen's lead and keeping the situation calm rather than escalating. It threw aggressive action. They formed a protective perimeter around the immediate area, while giving their colleagues space to continue his careful negotiation with the distraught man. Walsh looked around at the circle of armed officers and guards, then back at Chen's steady, compassionate gaze. The young guard had shown him more humanity and understanding in these few minutes than he had experienced in months of job interviews and bureaucratic indifference. You really think there's still hope for someone like me? Walsh asked, his voice barely audible above the crowd noise. Chen nodded slowly, maintaining eye contact with Walsh throughout their tense conversation. There's always hope, sir. Always. But you have to choose it. You have to decide right now that your life is worth more than this moment of anger and despair. The broken bottle still gleamed menacingly between them. But Walsh's grip had loosened considerably as Chen's words sank in. I used to have dreams, Walsh said quietly, tears continuing to flow down his cheeks. I wanted to start my own business, maybe help other people who lost their jobs like I did. But everything just fell apart, and I stopped believing that good. Things could happen to people like me. His confession hung in the air like a bridge between his rage and his humanity. Chen's voice remained steady and encouraging. Those dreams don't have to die just because you've hit a rough patch. My own grandfather lost everything during the war, but rebuilt his life piece by piece. Sometimes the worst moments are actually doorways to something better, but only if we choose to walk through them with courage. The police negotiator had arrived, but was allowing Chen to continue. Recognizing that the guard had established a connection that could resolve the situation peacefully, Walsh looked down at the broken bottle in his hand as if seeing it clearly, for the first time. The weapon that had represented his anger now seemed like a symbol of everything destructive in his thinking. "If I put this down, will you help me figure out what to do next?" Walsh asked, his voice filled with a mixture of hope and fear. Chen's response was immediate and sincere. "I give you my word as a soldier and as a human being, putting that bottle down is the first step toward getting your life back on track." Walsh's hand began to lower slowly, the broken glass moving away from Chen's neck for the first time in nearly 20 minutes. The crowd held its collective breath as the crisis seemed to be reaching a peaceful resolution. Remained perfectly still, not wanting to do anything that might break the fragile trust that had developed between them during their extraordinary conversation. With a deep, shuddering breath, Walsh let the broken bottle fall from his hand. It hit the pavement with a sharp crack that seemed to break the spell of tension that had held everyone frozen. Immediately, police officers moved in to secure the weapon and ensure the safety of everyone present. But their approach was gentle rather than aggressive, following Chen's example of treating Walsh as a human being in crisis rather than just a threat. Chen stepped forward as Walsh was being taken into custody, placing a reassuring hand on the man's shoulder. "You made the right choice," he said quietly. "This is the beginning of getting your life back, not the end of it." Walsh nodded through his tears, seeming to find strength in the guard's continued support even after the danger had passed. The incident made headlines across Britain, but not in the way anyone might have expected. Rather than focusing on the threat or the drama, news reports highlighted Chen's extraordinary compassion and skill in diffusing a potentially tragic situation. The story became a powerful example of how understanding and human connection could triumph over violence and despair. In the weeks that followed, Walsh received the mental health support he desperately needed while facing legal consequences for his actions. Chen visited him twice during his rehabilitation, keeping his promise to help however he could. The guard connected Walsh with veterans organizations that had programs for helping people transition back into productive work and meaningful lives. 6 months later, Walsh had found employment with a charity that helped unemployed workers develop new skills and find opportunities. His experience of hitting rock bottom and finding a way back had given him unique insight into helping others who face similar struggles. He often spoke about the Royal Guard who had seen his humanity even in his darkest moment, Chen continued. His service with even deeper understanding of what it meant to protect and serve. His actions had reminded everyone that true strength lay not in rigid adherence to protocol, but in the wisdom to recognize when human compassion was the most powerful tool available. The day a broken bottle threatened his life had ultimately saved 2 lives, his own and Derek Walsh's, proving that sometimes the most unthinkable thing that can happen is that understanding and mercy can transform even the most desperate situations. The incident became part of training programs for both police and military personnel, demonstrating how de-escalation techniques and genuine human connection could resolve crises that might otherwise end in tragedy. Chen's example showed that real courage sometimes meant standing perfectly still while offering hope to someone who had lost their way.